Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much. By the way, I know you can probably hear me without the mic, except you may not know, but we're actually recording this, and it's going to be, I think, live streamed, but that'll be clarified as we go through the program. My name is John Ray. I work with the Resort Municipality of Whistler. I'm a manager there, the manager of Strategic Alliances, and it's my privilege this evening to welcome you and to welcome the Walrus, and the Walrus Talks specifically, presented by Quest University to Maury Young Arts Center. And of course, Maury Young Arts Center is located on the traditional shared lands of the Lillooet Nation and the Squamish Nation, so we acknowledge that shared territory as well. Thank you all for being here this evening. You're in for a wonderful panel discussion, great perspective. I had the privilege of meeting a couple of the people who will be speaking this evening, and you're in for a real eye-opening discussion. Without further ado, what I would like to do is, again, on behalf of Mayor Nancy Wilhelm Morden and Council, as well as all the senior staff and staff at the RMOW, is to introduce you to Shelley Ambrose, who is the Executive Director of the Walrus Foundation and the publisher of the Walrus magazine. So without further ado, Shelley Ambrose.
Oh, well, is my mother here? No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, John Ray. I am indeed Shelley Ambrose, and it's very good to be in Whistler on such a stunning day. We got in last night. It was a bit rainy. Had dinner at that fabulous Alta Bistro. Have you been there? Really good, which was a fabulous time. It's very good to be here for Quest University Canada presents the Walrus Talks Innovation. This is our first Walrus Talks in Whistler. We've done 60 Walrus Talks across the country in the past 4 or 5 years, but this is our very first time in Whistler, and we know that Whistler is much more than mountains, so we're although they're beautiful, we're happy to be part of a slightly different kind of diversion. I understand that most folks in Whistler can rhyme off ski runs. We at the Walrus now can rhyme off all the cultural buildings because we spent today at the SLCC and the O'Dane and the library and popped into Armchair Books and had just a fabulous time. So hands up if you know what the Walrus magazine is. Oh, that's pretty good. Hands up if you subscribe to the Walrus magazine. That is bad. Bad. Okay, the people who just put their hands up, the subscribers, put your hands up again. I love you. I love you a lot. I'll talk to the rest of you about that in a few minutes. So for those of you who are new to us, the Walrus magazine and the Walrus Talks are both projects of the charitable nonprofit National Walrus Foundation. We have an educational mandate to create forums for conversations vital to Canadians. And on all Walrus platforms, you'll find stories and conversations on politics, culture, the environment, business, technology, art, cities, the West, the East, the North, foreign affairs, energy, youth leadership, creativity, water, and much more. The walrus is not, you know the walrus, it's a northern animal. It has no wings. We are not left wing, we are not right wing, we have no wings. We're an independent entity with no one point of view. So wherever you're from, because you're here with us, you are now a part of the Walrus community, which de facto means you are fearless, you are witty, you are thoughtful, and you're curious about Canada and its place in the world. The Walrus Foundation is supported by circulation, advertising, sponsorship, charitable donations, and partnerships, and there is no way we can do the work that we do without partners like Quest University Canada, which is right down the road here, and a truly unique academic institution. To tell us a little bit more about Quest, here is Quest's President and Vice Chancellor. Welcome, Peter Englert.
Good evening. I'd like to take the opportunity this evening to welcome everyone who has come to participate in what promises to be a wide-ranging and vital conversation about innovation. Special thanks go to the Walrus magazine for organizing this national series of talks, to our hosts here at the Maury Young Arts Center, in the beautiful town of Whistler, and to our speakers who have generously volunteered to share their ideas and insights with us. Quest University Canada is proud to initiate this particular Walrus talk on innovation in education, technology, society, and more. If we were on our campus in Squamish, I would expect all of our speakers to support their talks with properly documented scholarly sources. But we're in Whistler, so the format will be downhill and fast, with extra points for style and diversity of terrain. To say that you want to be innovative as an institution or that your working group is going to start thinking in a more innovative manner is an easy thing to do. You simply include the word innovation in your mission statement or marketing materials. Perhaps you even put innovation on the next meeting agenda. The results, however, are probably going to be miserable. That's because innovation does not start with the intent to innovate. It starts when you set out to do things. It may even seem like a simple thing that you want to do. But the innovative moment, the epiphany, comes when you set out to do and you run into a wall, or worse, an absolute void. Innovation comes from a challenge when someone says, the technology doesn't exist, no one else does what you want to do, or simply you can't do it that way. And that's why innovation always involves taking risk. You're doing something new, something that doesn't exist, something that others think you can't do. Doing requires you to step outside of your comfort zone. It requires you to push boundaries of what is known. Whistler, for example, is celebrating 50 years of going beyond. Quest University is celebrating a decade of innovation in education. Someone told us we couldn't build a small liberal arts and science university on a hill in the backyard of a famous and well-known research university. So we did. Quest University grants a dual Bachelor of Arts and Sciences degree, which means that all our students do science and do humanities in their very first block. We even put them in the field, trying to answer complex questions in that cornerstone block. We teach them to question, to try, to fail, to rethink, to revise, and to do again. In their next block, rhetoric, we might pair them up with a community partner to get them out into the world, to tackle real issues like sustainability of, for example, waste reduction. One of our seniors successfully tested a prototype for a subsurface drifter that can track the effects of pollution and climate change in local bodies of water. What does the student plan to do with this prototype after graduation? Mass production? Making some money? He's leaving it for other Quest students to develop and explore further. If you are truly innovating, there's always another problem to solve. There's always something new to be done. I hope you enjoy the fast-paced, illuminating conversation that follows now. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Somebody told us once, too, that you can't start a national general interest magazine that doesn't rely solely on advertising. So we did. Happy 10th anniversary to Quest. Your dedication to that kind of innovative education with real critical engagement is very impressive. So as I said, the talks tonight would not be possible without Quest, and they also would not be possible without you, because if you didn't come out tonight, there would be no one for the Walrus talkers to talk to, and that would have been a terrible shame. And we know that your time is valuable, so thank you for sharing some of it with us. I also want to thank some of our new friends here in town who were very helpful to us, John Ray and everyone at the city, the Whistler Public Library. If you were in there earlier this week, they put up a big Walrus poster asking what does innovation mean, and people were answering the question by writing with a Sharpie on the poster. They wrote things like having the moral courage to lead by example, being open-minded and getting over fear of change, solving our housing crisis. There was all sorts of things written on it. We also want to thank the Whistler Writers Festival, the Whistler Film Festival, and Arts Whistler. We had the pleasure of meeting Mo Douglas last evening, and all I have to say about Mo Douglas is, wow. Just terrific. So it's inspiring to see how much culture is actually created here with these excellent organizations. Our national partners, I'd like to recognize at Shirk, Shaw, Inspire, and AMIA Aeroplan. They're with us everywhere we go, and that's a lot of places. As I've said, we've now produced 60 of these across the country. Tonight our topic is innovation, and we know that that word means many things to many people, so I know we'll gain some new perspective tonight with our talkers. Here's how the Walrus Talks works. Each of our esteemed speakers has exactly 7 minutes. They know this. They are very disciplined. Each one will come up and introduce themselves. Did everybody on the way in get one of these? Does anyone not have one of these? Okay. Your program is in speaker order. You can follow along. If you'd like to know more about the speakers, simply flip it over, and their bios are there. And this way, you go along with us, and I don't just read to you. Now, having said that, we encourage our talkers, not that we're anti-TED or anti-TEDx, but we encourage our talkers not to memorize what they want to say to you, because we think that's an awful lot of energy. So we believe in the printed word, and we encourage them to use it. So they will have notes. So they will come up one after the other. You will see and hear 7 speakers in a row. And our hope is that an hour from now, excuse me, we will have a lot to talk about at the reception. Pardon me. Just before I let them get underway, I'd like to thank all of our speakers in advance. Thank you to First Nations leader and advisor, Kim Baird, former chief of the Tsawwassen First Nation, visiting the shared territory. Quest University Canada alumni, Andrew Luba, class of 2015. Chair, Global Acceleration Partners, Nicholas Parker, who has joined us, well, from Toronto, but via Shanghai and New York tonight. The founder and executive director of Canopy, Nicole Rycroft, up from Vancouver. Brewmaster and student in brewery operations management from Olds College in Alberta, Alex Villeneuve. Quest physical science tutor and an environmental chemist who knows a lot about water, formerly of Harvard, Yale, and Caltech, now at Quest, Rich Wildman. And the Whistler Center for Sustainability's executive director, Chi-Ying Ho. Thank you for coming. Let us begin.
Good evening, I'm Kim Baird. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Squamish and Lillooet First Nations. Thanks to the Walrus Foundation for inviting me to speak tonight on the topic of innovation. And the definition I found for innovation is the act or process of introducing new ideas, devices, or methods. And generally, I think society often innovates in response to a problem we need or to solve a challenge that confronts us. The title of my presentation is Reconciliation, the Need to Innovate Canada's Identity, because I think we've been long at a crossroads when it comes to Indigenous communities and Canada. I have a very short time to cover what I view as the challenge of our time, so apologies if my presentation seems to oversimplify things. First, I'll share a bit of my background, which has formed my views about this topic. I was a leader in my community for 22 years, 13 of which I was the chief, and all of which I spent advancing a modern treaty for my community, the Tsawwassen First Nation. I successfully concluded the negotiations, but am most proud of the fact that 96% of my community participated in voting on it, and about 70% of them who voted approved the agreement. This high level of engagement was not accidental and took a lot of work from me and my team. After the vote, I was privileged to lead the charge for our reassertion of self-governance. And on April 3rd in 2009, we removed the Indian Act from our community and replaced it with our own laws. While negotiations took 12 years, the community building, or what I view as our internal reconciliation, was taking place my whole 22 years at Tawasin. And it's still taking place as we figure out how we want to move forward as a community without the Indian Act, and to improve socioeconomic conditions for our people and ensure we are sustainable people on the territory we have inhabited for thousands of years. How do we overcome the terrible impacts of colonization? I can help create new governance institutions based on our community's design and have helped set a path for sustainability with a huge focus on investing in our community needs. Many view this as an innovation. Our first project is controversial, a mega mall that just opened a couple weeks ago. The mall will be a huge economic generator, not only for my community, but for the region. Over 284,000 people visited during the first 6 days, so many people had problems getting out of the parking lot. We've gone from being completely dependent on federal funding to being a major contributor to the economy regionally and beyond. This is just one example of change we're going through, and the changes we face are disruptive and deep and controversial. Our experience is but one model of reconciliation, but having come from the trenches, it has provided me with some unique insight on this topic. When talking about reconciliation, we can't forget the foundation of Canada, and this is our uncomfortable truth as a country. Indigenous peoples occupied the Americas for tens of thousands of years. When European settlers came over, it was at the expense of Indigenous populations, and this came in many forms, from the decimation of populations from Old World diseases, to the occupation of lands and the use of legislation to usurp Indigenous rights and title, to aggressive attempts to subjugation through residential schools. The foundations of non-Indigenous Canada ain't pretty, let's say. That isn't to say that every person had malicious intents. It's far more complex than that. But the systemic discrimination of Indigenous communities is so firmly entrenched that many of us don't even recognize our own often negative biases about Indigenous people. And these legacies have left us with terrible consequences, primarily poverty for First Nations, but also our sustainability as communities, with legal, political, and economic rights having been undermined and replaced with the Indian Act, a woefully inadequate legal framework that is nearly impossible to make work for our communities. And then to add insult to injury, our people get blamed for not being able to make it work. There have been many attempts to grapple with what seems like an intractable issue, from attempts with former prime ministers like the Kelowna Accord and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and now we see Prime Minister Trudeau's commitments to various initiatives, including the adoption of the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, and a commitment to restore a nation-to-nation relationship. It's still early days for these initiatives, and the dialogue is just starting, but expectations and impatience are at very high levels. And make no mistake, the courts have helped move this issue along, whether it be the Supreme Court decisions on how government has its honor at stake to ensure it deals with consulting and accommodating First Nation rights and title, to the William decision where the Chilcotin have established Aboriginal title. Our day of reckoning on resolving these issues arrived long ago. The time to innovate is overdue. And we must respect the self-determination of each First Nation and Indigenous community and recognize that there are many internal issues that need to be sorted due to colonization and very real capacity challenges. Reconciliation must be at all levels for Indigenous communities, including legal, political, economic, jurisdictional, ownership, and extraction rights. First Nations must have a quality of life comparable to other Canadians. It's not just rectifying the horror of residential schools and the TRC is a great start, in my opinion, but it doesn't deal with the full gamut of issues our communities need to resolve. Reconciliation must also provide for self-determination and respect different ways for Indigenous groups in Canada to engage. Modern treaties provide for First Nations to be citizens of Canada, while some Indigenous groups will never identify as Canadians. We must have a way of moving forward in spite of these important differences. No cookie-cutter approach will work for everyone, but we do have some models to look to, and we should study these here and internationally. I sense and welcome the public's growing discomfort over what we see in First Nation communities today. We need to do better. We need to envision a Canada where these gross inequities do not persist, where First Nations and Canadians can benefit from a sustainable future, embracing our differences instead of letting them drive what I currently view to be unacceptable outcomes. We will need to innovate to get there. We will need to engage with each other through our political leaders and through grassroots discussions. As Maury Sinclair has said, there are no shortcuts to reconciliation. This will be hard work for all of us, but work we must let our respective leaders know as important. In my vision, we will innovate Canada's institutions in the process of reconciliation by indigenizing Canadian government systems and structures. This means Indigenous participation won't come as an afterthought, but will be enabled from the structures and processes of our institutions to the continued representation of First Nation issues in Parliament and Senate. This enablement of First Nation involvement must be in partnership with First Nations. There must be also be co-created paths for First Nations that do not want to participate within Canadian structures. The Tsawwassen Treaty is a controversial model, and our decisions have been controversial as well. My purpose here isn't to advance Tsawwassen's approach, but it was the right approach in my community. It was our innovation and our path to reconciliation with British Columbia and Canada. I'm here to say reconciliation is possible, but it needs to respect self-determination of First Nations, and we will all have to compromise to make it work. It will only be through innovation that we resolve these long outstanding issues. We need to innovate our vision of what a reconciled Canada is, and it will only be through innovation that together we set our path forward, making Canada a place all of its residents can be proud of. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. And I just want to say what an honor it is to follow on such a critical issue as reconciliation. I'm Nicole Rycroft. I'd like to thank Shelley, David, and the team at the Walrus for this invitation. As you may have gleaned from my bio, I'm a professional tree hugger. And so I will be exploring innovation through the lens of conservation and the scale of change that we need. Now, normally I would preempt my comments by giving a warning that you need to reset your internal Siri language setting to Australian, but given that we're in Whistler, I'm probably on pretty safe ground. So, as we all know, our society is grappling with two major environmental issues, climate change and the sixth mass extinction. Both are enormous challenges. Both are anthropogenically driven, and both are resolvable. Reversing climate change and halting species decline are critical societal innovations. I'm going to talk about the art of possibility and how we go about actually making both of these innovations happen. The problems before us is that humanity, we consume too much, too fast, and we're consuming the wrong kinds of things. It's taking a toll, and this is the space, the critical space, where innovation can play a key role. None of us, obviously, want orangutans or caribou to go extinct, but for most of us, the scope of the challenge, the scope of the change that's needed, it feels too big in scope or out of our control. You know, we no longer make the cloth to sew our own clothes. We go to stores and we buy what's available to us. And so the companies, if the companies that are providing us with cars are only making ones that use fossil fuels, or the clothing that we buy comes from endangered forests, then our scope of choice and options feel limited. The economic and the supply chain systems behind our consumption are complex, and oftentimes they feel impenetrable. But here's the beauty of things in my mind. If we can imagine a different reality, then it means that solutions are actually within the realm of possibility. And that is the scope of the work that we have ahead of all of us to work together towards. So I think what we need to also understand is that innovation, for innovation to take place, then behavioral change is a critical element. So who here has developed a New Year's resolution? Really, not many people. Look at that. Okay, so generally people that develop New Year's resolutions, they've kind of committed to a positive change. So those folks that develop New Year's resolutions or personal goals for themselves, pop up your hands again. Okay, and for those that have never broken a New Year's resolution or a personal goal, keep your hand up. Yeah, okay, there's not many that are left. Yeah, behavioral change is a really difficult thing. And so try and imagine changing the behavior of 7 billion people that we share this planet with. It's a losing proposition. But what we can do is change. We can change, if I move back. David Leonard, do you have control of this as well? There we go, look at that. I love David. But what we can do is we can change the behavior of 500 to 1,000 key executives that control the purchasing decision of the companies that we buy our books, our cars, our magazines, our newspapers from. There is a truth in the old adage that the customer is always right. And for suppliers of palm oil or paper, their large corporate customers are key. Large publishers or clothing brands help to create the imperative to change practices, to stop logging in endangered species habitat, and to invest in the R&D of those truly sustainable alternatives that we need to come online. And this in turn drives change upstream to policy decision makers in government, who then bring about regulations and protect special places like the Great Bear Rainforest. And downstream, what it does is it puts environmental solutions into the hands of all of us that are individual consumers. If we want innovations to shift the dial on habitat loss and deforestation, there has to be an incentive to stop the status quo. And there has to be a champion to actually move in that direction. And contrary to, I know with Whistler's history, the Olympics loom large, contrary to the Olympics, where everybody wants to be first across the line, quite often in the world of sustainability, nobody wants to be too far off the pace, but it's an incredible risk. There are a few leaders that are willing to take that risk, to step into the realm of the unknown, and to be the first to step ahead of the pack. I'm going to spend just a little time looking at one early champion in the sustainability world. Raincoast Books, a BC publisher, proudly so. In the world of book publishing, it really doesn't come much bigger than Harry Potter. There's the Bible, but even that's debatable, whether it's bigger. And in the mid-2000s, when Raincoast was publishing the 5th in the Harry Potter book series, there were no book papers that were available for them to print on that were free of endangered forest fiber. But what we knew was that the Potter contract was lucrative enough that it would incentivize mills to develop eco-papers. And so we worked with Raincoast Books to put the challenge out to mills to develop 100% recycled paper. Recognizing that, first innovators tend to pay more, Raincoast were willing to absorb the additional cost and put the challenge out to mills to produce the eco-paper, recognizing that when it was done at an economy of scale that a contract the size of Harry Potter would enable, that other publishers would then be able to engage. And that with publishers engaging, that would then trigger a cycle that would then lead to more demand, greater economy of scale, and more affordable papers. And that's exactly what happened with Harry Potter. Not only did millions and millions of children have an environmental solution in their hand, there were 40 new papers that were developed that were environmental. Those papers are still available today. And it revolutionized the way that publishing was done internationally. So Harry Potter is one example of a global supply chain that was transformed by one publisher taking the financial risk at one end of the supply chain, and then a mill that was willing to take the risk of developing a paper for just one publisher for one book on the assumption that other publishers would then also come in and buy that paper. But those are key elements, as Peter mentioned, taking risk, key elements for innovation. But once those foundational blocks are in place, then change can happen relatively quickly. You know, business is entrepreneurial. Once there's a clear incentive, then business can actually move very fast. And so as a single company, it can actually be impossible to drive change, no matter how committed you are to actually making your supply chain and your environmental practice different. There is a need for peers and even competitors to become colleagues to enable this broader sustainability shift. And there is real power in collective action. We're just going to quickly look at the change that's taking place currently in the clothing industry in the shift to remove endangered forests from our rayon fabrics. Now, rayon, it's not necessarily a well-known fact that rayon is actually made from trees. In fact, it's made from 120 million trees every year, and that number is slated to more than double within the next decade. What has been a great innovation or invention for fabrics has come at an incredible toll to Indonesia's orangutans and Canada's boreal. And Canopy has created partnerships with more than 69 brands to eliminate the use of endangered forests from rayon fabrics and to kickstart commercial scale production of alternatives that support a circular economy. So those brands include global giants like H&M, Lululemon, Stella McCartney, sort of like a broad industry initiative. And with these brands collectively engaged, we have garnered commitments from rayon producers that represent 70% of the supply chain in just a 3-year period. And that's a remarkable change in a relatively short period of time. 70% of that supply chain is undergoing this transformation. Now, both the publishing industry as well as the fashion industry are working to improve their own environmental footprint as individual brands. They're working to transform their supply chain, and they're also contributing beyond the kind of boundaries of their normal corporate business to help safeguard landscapes of hope like the Great Bear Rainforest. Now, the Great Bear Rainforest, most of us are familiar with it, a spectacular landscape that earlier this year, 85% of it was set aside from logging and formally protected. And that result would have been impossible without the collective engagement of customer companies in the marketplace, engaging the government as well as the logging companies to change business as usual in that area. We can imagine a world where clean energy supplies our homes. We can imagine a world where the books that we read and the clothing that we wear comes from sustainable sources. But sometimes between our imagination and the realization of that vision, there can be a wall. You know, sometimes it can be a Donald Trump-sized wall that seems insurmountable at the time. But let's not be thrown off by that. We are scaling that wall, and call it innovation or call it evolution, call it supply chain transformation. Others may be making this decision, but they're making these decisions, these changes in practice, because we care and because we're engaged. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alex Villeneuve. I'm going to start out with a story, and you guys can talk to me after if you have any questions. So, When I was 15 years old, I met Dustin Bezier, school permaculturalist and biology teacher at Jasper Place High School. Dustin was the first person to introduce me to the concept of needs and yields. This principle and the shift in perspective I adopted afterwards has led me to approach innovation, entrepreneurialism, innovation, networking, and entrepreneurialism in a completely different way. In one of Dustin's first lessons, he explained to us that his job as a permaculture designer was to build resilient food production methods that mimic natural ecosystems. This style of design yielded well-planned gardens that, much like real ecosystems, require little or no maintenance in order to thrive. Dustin and other permaculture designers use a concept of needs and yields to effectively place components of their garden. They do this with a needs and yields analysis. Much like the name suggests, one simply picks a part of the garden in which to analyze and jots down everything that component needs in order to thrive and everything that it produces as a result. Once the designer has a needs and yields analysis of every part of the garden, he connects components with needs that match other components' yields, similarly to puzzle pieces. The perfect example of this needs and yields relationship is an aquaponics system. Fish yield ammonia-rich waste and need clean, oxygenated water in order to thrive. Plants need ammonia-rich fertilizers and filter waters as a result. When combined, in an aquaponics system, both needs and yields are satisfied and you have a largely sustainable system. After learning that I too could create effective and sustainable systems based on observing and catering to needs and yields, I began to take the time to visualize the needs and yields relationships in many of the systems around me. I started looking at components of forests, gardens, kitchen environments, the educational system, student spaces, and even empty walls completely differently. Exactly like in a forest or garden, the more connections and diversity a system had, the more likely it was to thrive. Suddenly, unused yields stopped seeming like problematic waste and started seeming like a chance to design a need. I stopped seeing obstacle and I started seeing opportunity. In my grade 11 year, I joined as many extracurricular activities and innovative projects that I could possibly manage. I now knew that every connection I could create in one or scrap of knowledge I could absorb could be vital in my ability to connect needs and yields in a future project. I was very careful to never categorize information or connections made in one project to that project alone. I found that as a result of this, the more that I learned in one activity, the more I was able to apply to completely different projects. Of course, these connections were not always positive ones. In fact, some of the most valuable connections I made during this time were the ones that followed failure. I tried and failed so many times during these projects that I began to look at them not as negative experiences, but just as another connection that I could utilize later on. Failure no longer scared me. It encouraged me to try again. The perspective I shaped during this time and the way I applied it to projects got me selected to represent Alberta's education system in both Finland and Toronto, led a classmate and I to design a food production system that won Edmonton's first innovation fair, and allowed me to grow the ingredients that I would use to make a ginger beer that went on to become Edmonton's first official winter drink. Every time partners and I applied needs and yields to a project, and every time we were able to connect components of seemingly unrelated projects, the more people liked to label us as innovators. Although the innovative label seemed to follow almost every one of our projects, innovation alone was never one of our end goals. Over time, I began to realize that innovation was just a byproduct of designs that analyzed needs and yields and created smart connections between them. I carried this perspective on to college. On my first day of Olds College, in the brewery while we were disposing of spent grains, which are a byproduct of the brewing process, I began to think about what the wasted grains were yielding and how their potential could be maximized. I almost instantly made the connection between my extracurricular experience growing oyster mushrooms for permaculture and culinary projects and this wasted grain product. I thought that this waste would make an excellent substrate on which to grow a variety of edible mushrooms. After a few weeks of experimentation, I observed that as a result of using the spent grains to produce mushrooms, that the grain's texture was greatly changed. I thought that since the complex fibers were being broken down during the mycelium's growth, that maybe the leftover grains could be used as animal feed. I tested this theory by sending my mushroom-inoculated grain for nutritional analysis. These were the results. It turned out, as the mycelium grew in the grain and produced mushrooms, the crude protein content of the substrate dramatically increased. Now, not only was there potential for gourmet mushroom production, but as a direct result, I could also produce a high-protein animal feed. Adhering to my needs and yields principle, my waste was now a valuable product. After these discoveries, I decided to incorporate my own company and to pursue the production of mushrooms and mycelium products from brewer's waste. Since high school, I've had a lot of time to think about what innovation means and how it applies to the real world. I feel many people and companies approach innovation from completely the wrong perspective. It seems that there's a quota for innovation in order to sell you a product, and many seem to innovate just for the sake of innovating. If everyone in this room were to go out of their way to intentionally create connections, join new groups, projects, and clubs, take the time to stop and think about what the things around them are yielding and how their potential could be maximized. And if, when you leave this room, you stopped letting failure seem like failure, you will undoubtedly yield innovation.
Hello, my name is Rich Wildman. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to David Leonard and Shelley Ambrose and their colleagues at the Walrus Foundation, as well as Leslie DeBee and Peter Engler and Quest University Canada for having me here. I'm a professor at nearby Quest University Canada, and I teach classes in chemistry and environmental science and persuasive writing and statistics. Technically speaking, this is what I get paid to do. However, my work is better described by a witticism of one of my colleagues, Bob Perkins. He says, "I don't get paid to teach. That stuff's fun, and I do it for free. I get paid to grade." Generating grades takes up a lot of my time, and grading matters to my students too. For our purposes, psychology research surrounding grades suggests that grades are a reward and punishment structure that we teachers use to get students to do things that we want them to do. If there's a late penalty on turning in an assignment, students will stay up all night to get it in on time. If there's not, they won't. If a higher grade goes to those who draw a picture to support their ideas, then many will draw the picture, and if there isn't, they don't. In my courses, this led to some problems. Students underperformed in the parts of class that weren't graded. As one example, class discussions were weak when students are tired because there's no incentive to listen carefully and make insightful comments. What's more, students only learn the material that's on the assignment. If I ask 8 questions, they'll answer 8 questions. Then they're done. When they're done fulfilling a grading rubric, learning stops. So last spring, in my 30th course at Quest, I stopped grading homework assignments. Now, with few exceptions, narrative evaluations determine the overall grades for my courses. The major exception is chemistry, in which half of the course still comes from traditional chemistry tests, and the other half is from narrative evaluations. So how do these narrative evaluations work? How do you get a good grade in one of my classes? The basic idea is that students are now graded on all interactions with me. So their contributions in class discussions, the emails they might write me asking for help, what they say in my office after class ends, and the quality of their written assignments are all fair game. They need to be great all the time. They must find a way to show me what they know. There are some questions of different learning styles and personalities, as well as some issues of bias that I've worked out. Those are for a different talk. This has led class to be far more satisfying. But it has also created an interesting new dimension that I want to bring up tonight. To succeed in my new system, students need to show off what they know. Is this a problem? Am I forcing them to brag? I'll skip a long story. Suffice to say that I come from cultures in which bragging is no big deal. Here in Canada and at Quest, it's different. I learned right away not to tout my accomplishments in front of students who called me arrogant for doing so. When I was talking to a colleague about this, she looked at me as though I had just stated the obvious and said, "I usually try to make the students look smart and leave myself out of it." I've had colleagues tell me that they're afraid of describing their accomplishments to their peers, even something large that takes a lot of effort, like publishing a new book, for fear of making other colleagues feel bad. This phenomenon is not just limited to one type of person in my life, and I'm not the only one to observe it. According to the magazine Canadian Business, a recent survey by LinkedIn found that only 29% of Canadians feel comfortable talking about their achievements at work, and 53% admitted that doing so sounds like bragging to them. I think we all know the reason why. A braggart sounds better than those around him or her, thus making them appear lower. The effect is the same as overtly putting people down, and so we all believe that it's rude to brag. Let me tell you another story. When I was a graduate student, a senior student had recently landed a prestigious and coveted faculty position. I asked him what he had done to earn it. He simply would not answer, saying that the job market is all a crapshoot, that it's all about fit, that he has been very fortunate in life. Maybe so, I said, but professorships aren't given out at random. You must have done a lot right. What did you do? He looked at me and declared flatly, Rich, I am not going to toot my own horn. The problem is, answering my question helpfully wouldn't have been bragging because he wouldn't have been making himself seem better than me. It's obvious that he had succeeded in specific ways that I hadn't, and I wanted to learn from him. My colleague did me a disservice, and so I don't pass that disservice on to my students and my colleagues. I don't hide that I've done a couple multi-year research projects on large reservoirs, that I have extensive training in statistics, that I was a decorated university varsity athlete. I tell them what I can do well and what I've accomplished. Quest students are worryingly bad at plainly saying to each other, like I did to you just now, this is what I can do. This matters. Without an honest reporting of what we do well, which I believe is not bragging, the struggling students never find out the habits of the successful ones. Everyone but me misses out on the neat ideas that students write into their papers. And they're less able to get jobs. Yes, it's widely understood among human resources professionals that the inability to truthfully and accurately promote oneself is a major impediment to landing a job following an interview. In fact, the title and the subtitle of the Canadian Business article I quoted are, Canadians harm our careers because we're afraid of bragging, and employers are looking for candidates who can sell their skills, but many Canadians say they just aren't comfortable doing it. The social stigma against bragging is so strong that it prevents non-judgmental, meaningful exchanges about ourselves. I set out to de-emphasize grading in my courses, to invest in students' intrinsic desires to learn. But my innovation of grading with narrative evaluations is also training my students to navigate the difficult social balance between bragging and reporting honestly about who they are. This training will do far more to prepare them for the true successes of real life, like pleasing a client, delivering value to shareholders, gaining the trust of a colleague, or seeing new possibilities for collaboration with their peers. With this in mind, I'll end with some questions. In your personal and professional lives, where is the line between useful self-promotion and bragging? Are you honest about the gifts and talents you bring to our society? Do you self-promote enough? After all, none of you have a homework assignment that you'll be turning in to me to grade on Monday. And so how will I ever know the value that each of you contribute to our world? Thank you.
Hi. Where's the clicker thing? Here we go. Hi, my name's Andrew Luba. Thanks for having me tonight. I also want to thank my mom, who's watching on the live stream, for being an inspiring woman. So, innovation is a pretty important word, but I think it's something that most of us don't really know that much about. We don't know how it was used in the past, what it means to different people now, or really what makes someone or something particularly innovative. But I think it's definitely a word worth exploring because it has a lot of power in shaping our society now and what our society might be like in the future. So I wanted to approach innovation with some questions. And what I found was that the way a lot of people in North America are thinking about innovation might be problematic. When we're talking about innovation, what we might really be talking about is misinnovation. So I want to share with you how I came to this idea of misinnovation while exploring innovation. So I started off just by asking some basic questions. What is innovation? Why innovate? Who innovates? And these generated some useful insights, and they were interesting to explore, but they didn't really get to the bottom of what innovation was. So I kept asking more questions, and I came to one that I think really challenged how I was thinking about innovation and challenged these earlier questions. And that was, who directs innovation? Who are the people who are actually allocating funds and resources to the projects and initiatives that we're calling innovative? And who are the people who are choosing how we're actually spending our human resources and energy? So here we have a picture of the Apple executive board. I mean, they're a pretty innovative company, and they make a lot of decisions that affect a lot of people's lives. And when we look at this board, we can see that there's some patterns emerging, and we can ask who's actually making decisions. When we look at the global leadership team for Apple, we see that 72% of positions are held by men, and 67% of positions are held by white people, which obviously doesn't reflect global population averages and demographics. And this is a company that's pretty proud of its diversity. And when we compare it to other companies in the innovative tech industry, it's actually pretty good at diversity. It's pretty good at including different people who aren't just white men. And we can see this pattern emerging and continuing into other areas of innovation. So I looked at venture capital, which are people who are actually funding new innovative startups and bringing these startups capital injections that would bring them success in the future. And what I found was that in the United States, 92% of senior investment team roles are held by men, and 78% of senior investment team roles are held by white people, which once again doesn't reflect demographics. And if we think of the Canadian government as an innovative place, I mean, government, it's debatable whether it's innovative, but there's definitely a lot of space for innovation. We see that 74% of people in our House of Commons are men, and 83% of people in our House of Commons are white. So we see this pattern happening. White men are directing innovation. But it's not so much just that it's white men, it's that a particularly privileged group of people are directing innovation and have a lot of control over what's happening in our society. And what that means is that whether consciously or subconsciously, funds end up going to people who are also of this particularly privileged group. And so I wanted to ask what this actually means. And for me, what this meant was that I needed to reassess my earlier questions and look at them through a different lens. I need to ask not what is innovation, but maybe ask who defines innovation. And in this case, money talks. The projects that happen are the projects that we consider innovative. The projects that are brought into implementation and made widely available across North America are the ones that we hear about and think about, like Apple's projects, for example. So in reality, the people who are giving money and making these projects happen are the people who are defining innovation. They're giving funds to the projects that they see as innovative, and that's the way we start to think of innovation and the word innovation. So the directors of innovation are the people defining. And what that means is that there are some effects on the purpose of innovation. So we can ask again, why innovate? And what we see is that the people who are defining innovation have a lot of power in influencing this question. And we're innovating to serve their purposes. What this means is that they give funds to projects that they deem worthy, that they deem as innovative, and funds that are serving their goals now, what they think society should be like as a whole, and where they want us to go in the future. So we can also question further and say, who's innovating? Rather than asking that, we can say, who has no voice in innovation? Who are the people who are being excluded by the power structures in our innovation world? And who are the people who are being left out of defining innovation, directing innovation, influencing the purpose of innovation, and therefore left out of shaping what we're doing now to create a different tomorrow that may not be including all people's voices? So this comes back then to a basic question that's underlying a lot more than innovation. And that's, who has power? A privileged group of people is defining innovation, it's defining the purpose of innovation, and it's deciding who to include in innovation. Colonial power structures are giving power to a specific group of people to have more influence in shaping our society now and our society as we go forward, which doesn't seem just. So we can think back to this idea of misinnovation, and we can think of some concrete examples, like Dyson spending $100 million researching a new hairdryer, or Apple spending almost $5 billion researching the iPhone 7, which didn't necessarily improve on the iPhone 6 and surely didn't help a lot of people around the world to live better quality of life. We can also think of areas where we've missed on innovation, like Canadian food bank system, which has been struggling to provide food security for people across this country for a long time. And we haven't been investing enough into changing this system or involving the voices of people who are actually in the system to make a better experience, because it doesn't serve the ends of the privileged people who are giving out the funds. So I think that if all people and all groups have a right to shaping our society now and shaping our world as we go forward, we need to shift misinnovation back to innovation. We need to include all people's voices, and not just include those voices in a way that's token, but really give all people actual power in making decisions and a right to that power. Not just saying, okay, well now we're going to put a few different people on the board of Apple, but actually involving the voices of people who are in China on the ground mining for Apple and giving them power to say, we don't want to do this project, or we do want to do this project, and consulting these people in the process throughout. And we might come not just to better products, but to products that are made in a better way throughout the process of actually creating that product. It also might shift away our priorities from being profit-driven for a select group of people to quality of life driven for a larger group of people. And so it could have some social good. So I want to end with a quote from Rebecca Solnit, who's a prominent feminist author right now. And she says, "Having the right to show up and speak are basic to survival, to dignity, and to liberty." And I want to add that having the right to shape our current world and our future worlds, whether it's through innovation or through other means, is basic to a fair and just society. Thank you.
Wow, this is really fun. Hi, my name's Chi-Yang Ho. My talk today is called The Space in Between, AKA the Millennial Mindset and Social Entrepreneurism. I don't usually start a talk off with a photo of myself, but when I came up with the title for this talk, The Space in Between, this photo came to mind of a hike I did several years ago. It really shows the space in between. The idea of the space in between describes a place of not one definitive thing or another, but a blend of two ends of a spectrum, of two polar perspectives, of two ways of doing things. It's a place of innovation. But why do I bring up millennials? I like to talk about the millennial mindset rather than just millennials. Looking around, maybe not all of us are millennials, born somewhere between 1982 and around 2000. But we all may have an inner millennial, or we all might have the millennial mindset. So let me tell you what that is. Even though we may think of millennials as being self-absorbed and conspicuous in everything they do, there's some pretty interesting characteristics that we can describe of the millennial mindset that are conducive to changing the world. These characteristics include conspicuous leisure. Millennials are compelled to document everything they do and then share it with the world on social media. However, this takes business accountability and transparency to a new level. Millennials embrace rare and unique experiences, but they must be authentic. The sharing economy. Millennials embrace opportunities such as Airbnb, tool libraries, Uber, meal sharing. They're connected and networked, and they like to collaborate more than other generations. Healthinism. Millennials are less concerned with weight loss and looking good, but are more concerned about being healthy. However, they wouldn't hesitate to mix fitness with hedonism and partying hard. And good food is an essential cultural experience that is to be shared. Another characteristic is called bleisure. US millennials are more likely than any other demographic to combine a business trip with leisure travel that aligns with their personal interests. And how does the millennial mindset think about work and money? It's no longer black and white like previous generations, perhaps. Millennials are more careful about taking on too much debt and spending frivolously. They're motivated more by experiences than by stuff, and they're socially conscious. They shop and buy products and services from businesses that prioritize social causes that align with theirs, including the environment. It's good news for Canopy, right? They expect hotels and resorts to incorporate social and environmental responsibility practices right into their operations. So let's learn from this millennial mindset, where the space in between these dichotomies is blended and becomes the space for innovation. With respect to business, let's move beyond corporate social responsibility. While CSR are important practices, they're often just distinct from the business purpose or the business mission. Instead, let's focus on the innovation space in between business and society, between financial profit and social profit. This is the social enterprise space. A social enterprise is an organization, it can be a nonprofit or a for-profit, that uses business strategies to create social and/or environmental benefits. Its social mission is as core to their success as any potential profit. And I think we saw some examples of amazing social enterprises. This is one of my favorite ones and the most disruptive social innovations or social enterprises that I've heard of recently. This is Wise Monkey. Has anyone had Wise Monkey tea? So their social purpose, you can see, is integrated right into their business purpose. Their mission is to break the poverty cycle in coffee communities by harvesting a tasty, healthy, and sustainable product. This was started by two guys doing some research for a new business project. They'd been traveling around the world, they'd been to Nicaragua a few times, and were aware of the difficulties that Latin American coffee growers and farmers face. So they started doing some research and found out about the benefits of coffee leaf tea. So it's the tea made from the coffee plant leaves. They realized that this could solve a serious problem in the coffee industry. The coffee industry, in the last few years, the coffee industry and the market has been plummeting worldwide, and because coffee beans can only be harvested 3 months of the year, most of the workers were seasonal, and most of them were unemployed the rest of the year. So they figured that if the farmers could also sell the coffee leaves, they could create a second source of income for their employees. So these two guys went to Nicaragua, met with dozens of organic farmers, and they came up with a one-of-a-kind revolutionary tea. What they say is, not only does it do your body some good, it does the farmers some awesome. The coffee leaf can be harvested year-round, creating year-round employment for the coffee pickers. They source their coffee leaves from an organic fair trade producer, this guy Armando Matalpalga in Nicaragua, who can now employ his workers year-round. And last year they won the World Tea Awards for their best product. And apparently this tea is smoother than other teas. This is very cool as well. This social enterprise is smart cutlery that can detect allergens and harmful bacteria. It's the creation of two young women who were inspired to combat the spread of a common bacteria that was transmitted through cutlery in China and causing cancer. These two young entrepreneurs invented this last year when they were 16 as a project for their grade 11 class at West Point Grey Academy. Not only can the cutlery detect allergens, for us who are less concerned with that perhaps, it can also detect nutrition and calories. And these girls came to Whistler last week and spoke at the International Day of the Girl event in Whistler. And close to home, these are just a few of the millennial thinking entrepreneurs who are disrupting how we do business in the sea to sky corridor. Dushi is sushi for pets. This is a new business, a new enterprise created by two chefs in Whistler who work with sushi restaurants and take the leftover salmon skins and scraps and blend it with the leftover pulp from organic juice bars and make a salmon jerky. And my cat really likes these. So sushi for pets. Another one is Ski Heaven. They take your treasured old skis and snowboards and create works of art to capture your mountain memories and to keep these used products out of the landfill. And finally, this new enterprise was started by the Pie Company in Squamish. They created a new organization called Cutting Barriers Training and Employment Society to train people with barriers to employment and place them in service industry positions where there's a dire employee shortage in the sea to sky corridor. I could go on and on with the growing number of really innovative and disruptive social enterprises that I've heard of and that I've worked with, but I've only got 7 minutes. So in closing, I'd like to say that I hope by all of us releasing our inner millennial, we can use the space in between as our innovation space to create a better world. I'd just like to acknowledge my friends at Junction Strategies and Origin Designs for the ideas behind the millennial mindset and the space in between. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Nicholas Parker, and I am sometimes known as Moomer, which means I'm a boomer who thinks he or she is behaving like a millennial. It's great to be the last speaker because it's given me a chance to rewrite my entire presentation and to reflect on my cab ride from Vancouver Airport into Vancouver yesterday before I came up here. And I'm always curious, as a first-generation Canadian myself, about where we all come from and how we've come to be here. So this cab driver, but it's a delicate conversation sometimes because you sometimes cause offense. So you think by asking questions, people feel that you think they don't belong here. So I delicately said to this cab driver, who didn't have a Canadian accent, I said, "Oh, so have you lived here all your life?" And the cab driver went quiet, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've blown it again. And finally looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, "No, not yet." So this person clearly has a long-term perspective, and this is one I want to share with you, because my topic of my talk in the next few minutes is Next Tech, the ultimate and necessary innovation revolution, how we can create an intelligence-based love economy. Now let me just back up a second here and tell you where I've come from. I'm actually, other than being called Moomer, I'm sometimes called Mr. Clean Tech, because I coined the term clean tech 15 years ago to make a distinction between cleanup technology, which is what we really had in the environmental industry, to a new paradigm of how we could design out pollution and things we didn't want. And at the time of coining this term, I didn't realize that 12 years, 15 years later, I'd be standing here telling you that clean tech, almost within 3 years, became the largest category of venture capital investment in the US. And a decade or so later, we've seen $120 billion invested by venture capitalists in innovation startups. However, we're not getting where we need to go. And probably like me, you were completely dialed in to the World Geological Congress in Cape Town this summer, which was competing with the Rio Olympics for our attention. So on the off chance that two of you didn't pay attention to what was going on in Cape Town, let me summarize, because they made an announcement that we've been waiting to make for 12,000 years, which is that we're now officially, since the 1950s, according to the world's geologists, into the Anthropocene era. Now, that term has already been referenced by previous speakers, but what does this really mean? It means that now we humans are the defining force of nature. And that's quite remarkable, given that we've only been around for 10,000 years, and we've come a long way, and we can now find planets that are, hundreds of millions of light years away. But it also means that we arrived at the party at 5 minutes to midnight, and we've already trashed the joint. Oh, we have to come and see the kinds of things that have already been shared by previous speakers is not as things that are great and cool and nice and wow, but is absolutely profound. We are in uncharted territory. And many of us know the data around climate change, and we're aware of the scale and the magnitude of what's coming at us at warp speed. but we're not necessarily aware of the full range of things that are happening. For example, how many of us here are aware that 83% of the elephants in Africa were wiped out in the last 10 years? How many of us are aware that by 2040 or 2050, there'll be more plastic in the ocean by weight than there will be fish? The scale of what we've got to contend with. And part of the challenge is the way we think about things. So Next Tech is about what is next and what the nexus is between nature, new media, and neurobiology. So bear with me, because I'm going to have to go through this rather quickly in order to make my point here. So nature, we know we're on the eve of an ecological crisis. In fact, the crisis is already here. But it's not just the environmental dimension, it's our violence. So for thousands of years, if my club was bigger than yours, I got what I wanted. But today, where chemical weapons, nuclear weapons are increasingly dispersed around the world with people we really wouldn't want to have the finger on the trigger with, including south of the border, we have to learn that we can't fight anymore. We physically cannot do this. And we're a generation away, maybe 2 generations away at best, from having a catastrophic event. So we absolutely have to change, and we have to change now. Fortunately, nature is also a source of inspiration, as we've already heard from other speakers. Whether we call it biomimicry, or whether we call it syntropy, whether we call it any number of terms that are available to us, aquaponics, the circular economy, and by the way, I spend about a third of my time in China, and the current 13th five-year plan is based on the notion of the circular economy. So, again, we have to shift our perspectives on what's happening. We need systems design, and we also need to tap into traditional knowledge. And thank goodness, First Nations and Aboriginal peoples in Canada and around the world are holding the ring for the rest of us while we catch up with what they already know. So, we also have these remarkable tools, new media. When I was a young person, I remember playing with a telex machine. I remember cassettes, 8-track. And now we have the world of the internet, which is also enabling all kinds of other things to happen. Big data. Big data is the microscope of the 21st century. The microscope enables us to see biology, and we know the results of that. Now we have big data, which enables us to see things that heretofore were invisible to us, and we can see patterns, sometimes quite beautifully and artistically. We also have the tools to collaborate and to cooperate in ways that we never imagined were possible. We have citizen science. We have companies like Local Motors that involve 4,000 people around the world in designing a new kind of automobile that drives for something like 300 to 400 miles before it needs to have gasoline again, or it'll be eclipsed by the next generation of cars that don't even require gasoline. We have the sharing economy. I was fortunate enough to be an angel investor in a company called Zipcar about a decade ago. They couldn't raise a nickel in Silicon Valley, and now we have Uber, the largest taxi company in the world that doesn't own any taxis, Facebook, the largest content provider that doesn't produce any content, and Airbnb, the world's largest hotel chain that doesn't own any hotels. The world has changed, and we can collaborate, whether it's through crowdfunding and crowdsourcing ideas. We have these tools. So if we have the tools and we have an existential crisis, why does it seem that most of the time doing the right thing and the principled thing means you're swimming upstream? Why is it so difficult? Why do we constantly have to argue with people about what is going on? And as Einstein said, and as the Talmud said, the sacred Jewish text, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So clearly we have to change. Einstein said it as well. We can't solve problems with the same way of thinking, and so on and so forth. And we're now learning through neuroscience, which I would argue is the most profound area of human inquiry, that we have plasticity, that we're not hardwired into one way of being, that we can change how we perceive things, and that the inner world, the mind, maps the outer world. So we need mind sight along with insight. that will inspire us to think differently. And for example, we now see a world where wealth creation doesn't necessarily require job creation. So Google is worth 400 billion, but only employs 25,000 people. Whereas Renault in France is worth 4 billion in the capital market, but employs 250,000 people. Well, this worries the heck out of finance and economic ministers who go, do we invest and support metal bashers, or do we go for the high-tech stuff? This is a false dilemma. Haven't we wanted all through our history to be able to create wealth without having to work? The future's arrived. Why can't we have a guaranteed minimum income so that we can focus our time on elder care and reconciliation and on environmental restoration and startups and social enterprise areas and all kinds of things that we want to do? Because we have an attitude that we'll all be lazy and watch Netflix. And we probably would for 6 months, and then we'll go do something. So I think we need to take the science of neuroscience, which some would call mindfulness, but in a scientific wrapping, and rethink who we are, because we have shown through our history that we've been able to make leaps of consciousness. We've been able to go to the next stage of the journey. And now the future's arrived. So here we are as Canadians, given by the Creator all the human and natural resources one could ever need and want. And if we can't do it, who the heck can? This can be exportable excellence. And so if I capture the spirit of my predecessors, what I would try and say is that if we can reconcile ourselves to this reality, then we can match our needs to what it needs to be done, and we can yield the outcomes that will be worth bragging about. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we start on time, we end on time. I want to my head is spinning. Because Nicole mentioned Trump, can I say thank you bigly? Can we just use like a made-up word, bigly? We use the word Walrus, we know that's not a word. I learned 2 new words tonight, bleasure. Does everyone know about bleasure? That was Chiang. And I also douchey. Sushi. I'm going to go out there and say, do you have any douchey? It's hilarious. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Kim Baird, Andrew Luba, Nicholas Parker, Nicole Rycroft, Alex Villeneuve, Rich Wildman, and Che-Ying Ho. There are just 3 more Walrus talks this fall, including one on Monday in Victoria at UVic. If you want to come with us, we'd be thrilled to have you. Our topic there is youth leadership. And if you can join us, just, let us know. And if you can't join us in person, you can join us by live stream. And if you can't join us by live stream, you can go backwards in time and watch all of the Walrus talkers. There are now more than 300 of them on Walrus TV on our YouTube channel. Our username is Walrus Television, and there are 307-minute talkers up there. You can also subscribe to the Walrus on our website, or, and I told you I was going to come back to this, you can subscribe out there with Kaylin, who greeted you at the desk. It will save you time, it will save you money, it will prove that you love your community, the future of our country, and it's very hard to be Canadian if you don't read the Walrus. So, subscribe. I've been all over the village today. I think there are only 2 points of sale in Whistler for the Walrus, Shoppers, and the bookstore. Yes. So if you are going to read the Walrus, it's better if it comes to your mailbox. We practically deliver it to your door in person. We meant to have a copy of our magazine for you, each of you, tonight, but they're sitting on a FedEx dock somewhere down in Vancouver, and they didn't make it up. So there are a few copies out there, but the only way you can get them is to sign up for our newsletter. So the first 23 people that sign up for a newsletter will get a free copy of the magazine. And if you put your business card in the bowl out there, the basket out there, I am going to do a draw for a free 1-year subscription. These are all ways we're getting around the fact that the Walrus magazine did not arrive here today. I'm also excited to tell you that, of course, we come to British Columbia a lot, and we're coming back in 2017, Canada's 150th birthday, on a very special national tour with the members of the Order of Canada and youth leaders and the Governor General. For that tour, we're actually going to be in Surrey, and if you would like to join us there, the tickets are free, but you have to sign up to our newsletter to get invited. So what are we all going to do? If you just do this one thing, the world will just come to you. I want to thank everyone at Quest for their support and help in making tonight's event possible. And I know that sometimes people get annoyed when people have too many people to thank, but I'm grateful that we have so many people to thank. So thank you to Rebecca and the team at Maury Young Arts Center for hosting us, to our friend John Ray for giving us the keys to the city. Thank you to the Whistler Library, Elizabeth Tracy, the Whistler Film Festival, Shauna Hardy, the Whistler Writers Festival, Stella Harvey, Arts Whistler, Mo Douglas and her group, and all of the wonderful community of arts and education orgs in this city. We'd love to come back to Whistler. I hope we can make it an annual event. Thank you to the Walrus event team, David Leonard, Blair Elliott, and Kaylin Cooper. And I have just a couple more thank yous, but before I do that, could the front row of talkers up and out, so you guys don't do that weird thing where you trap them at the end and start talking to them before they even get a glass of wine in their hand. Run, run, run. Okay.
Here's my phone.
So I would like you all to join us at the reception in the lobby when you're not visiting Kaylin and signing up for the newsletter. There is food and there is drink, and if you're there, there will be great conversation. I think there's supposed to be a basket here for me to do the draw, don't there? That's just great. Okay, thank you for the business card, people, and the 1-year free subscription is going to Gord Anand. Where's Gord? Gord, come and see me. Please join us at the reception, and thank you for coming. Good night and safe home.